This video is going to be a little bit different to my regular videos. This not only because I'm trying out a new studio setup, it is also because I wanted to make this an opinion piece, a video essay if you like. I wanted to talk about my personal opinion about the use of generative artificial intelligence in the creative disciplines, and I wanted to do that from the perspective of an educator who has been working in this field for more than 3 decades. With that in mind, I'm going to make the point that yes, generative artificial intelligence is going to have a massive impact on the creative disciplines. It's going to turn many of our industries inside out and upside down, but at the same time also no, it's not going to make the jobs of artists and designers obsolete. On the contrary, I believe that generative artificial intelligence will create an increased need for true artists and designers, and I'm going to put the emphasis on true, and I'm going to come back to that towards the end of this video. Most importantly, however, I'm going to explain why the heck I'm holding a pillow and what this pillow has to do with anything. So let's get started. I'd like to start this discussion with a clip from a recent Asmongold reaction video that sparked a lot of controversy. In this video, he talked about the reported use of artificial intelligence in a recent video game release, and in particular the reaction of artists and designers with respect to the use of artificial intelligence. I should point out that I'm a huge fan of Asmongold. He has this uncanny capability to take the most complicated subjects and break them down in a way that is very easy to understand and very consumable. He does that so well, in fact, that I sometimes have the feeling he's just playing a character and in reality has multiple advanced degrees on his belt. Just saying. Now, in the unlikely event that you have never heard of Asmongold, there are 2 things I need to say. First of all, you have been living under a rock for the last couple of years. And second, he is a very popular streamer, and let's just say he talks a lot, has a lot of opinions, and people listen. So let's hear what Asmongold had to say about the opinion of artists and designers regarding the use of artificial intelligence in the creation of art.
AI and the sentiment from artists' opinions don't matter. It just doesn't matter, because what matters is the opinion of the people that are buying the product. Like, it doesn't, like, your opinion on it, like, just because you do it doesn't, like, nobody cares. Like, it's not relevant. It's like whenever one of these, like, you know, really well-respected and really respectable directors talks about how bad Marvel is. Shut up, old man. Shut up. I like watching the Thor movie. It was cool. It's not up to him to decide what people can and can't like.
Now, this is a very pointed statement, obviously, but it is fundamentally correct. Nevertheless, a lot of people got very upset about it, which came a little bit as a surprise to me because I didn't think that this opinion would actually be controversial at all. To give you a less loaded example, let's use something that is a little bit closer to my own backyard. I have been an educator for more than 30 years. Never in my life did I have the feeling that it is a responsibility of the students to care about how the teacher creates their instructional design. That is just not the case. On the contrary, I hold a very strong belief that it is instead the responsibility of the educator to make the students appreciate the topic that they are studying. It doesn't really matter how the teacher designed the learning experience as long as it provides value to the students. Now, if a teacher is really, really good, there will eventually come a time where students are starting to appreciate the quality of the teaching style that a teacher has. But this is not the default expectation. It's something that has to be earned through hard work by the teacher. And in the very same way, it is not the responsibility of the audience to care for how the artists created their artwork. It simply isn't. On the contrary, it is the responsibility of the artists to make the audience appreciate the artwork. Only if an artist is very, very, very good, there is a chance that the audience might start to care about how the artist created the art. But that cannot be the expectation. Rather, it is something that has to be earned by the artists or designers. It is something they have to work for very, very hard. By default, the audience does not care if the art has been created by a human artist or by generative artificial intelligence. Okay, now I hear you say, well, Michael, that's all well and fine, but you are completely wrong. Generative artificial intelligence isn't really creating anything, it's just regurgitating things that it has seen in its training set. It doesn't really create anything new. And to that I say, well, there's some truth to that, but let's not forget that the systems that drive generative artificial intelligence are very similar to how the human brain works. In reality, we humans also regurgitate things that we have seen in the past. That is how we learn. We see things, we experience things, we reflect about things, and we then let these things, experiences and reflections influence what we create. And that is not that different to how generative artificial intelligence works. The main question here is, can generative artificial intelligence really be creative? Can it create something that is completely new and not just copy things that it has seen in its training set? Human creativity is built on our ability to reflect about the work that we do and to use this reflection for self-improvement. This capacity to self-reflect, to be self-aware about the work that we do, is something that we call an emergent property of our virology. By emergent in this context, I mean something that is technically not hard-coded in our brain. Rather, you can think of it as something that is almost like an unintended consequence of the way our brain evolved. It sort of emerged out of our physiology. What made many people so excited about generative artificial intelligence is that some of the models that are used are starting to exhibit the same type of emergent behavior as well. One example that experts usually point towards is a short video clip that Sora created that shows two pirate ships battling in a cup of coffee. In this example, Sora correctly interpreted the fluid dynamics that you would see in a cup of coffee. It did this without having learned anything about fluid dynamics or even physics. It just correctly inferred that knowledge from similar media that must have been part of its training set. In other words, Sora's understanding of fluid dynamics emerged out of its system architecture. It was never specifically trained to gain that knowledge. Now, it could be that the training set did indeed include a video that showed two pirate ships battling in a cup of coffee. We don't really know. Could be. However, this is very, very unlikely. And on top of everything, we have many other examples where we are starting to see that generative artificial intelligence is starting to exhibit emergent behavior, just like this one. And the key is that as these systems are starting to exhibit this type of emergent behavior, they are starting to become independently creative. I wanted to give a second example from my own experience, and this is where finally the pillow makes an appearance. The story begins when I recently passed 10,000 subscribers on my channel, and I felt it might be an interesting thing to do a little bit of a merchandising drop. A couple of things, maybe a mug, maybe a pillow, a couple of other things. The only problem was that I didn't really have any funny or creative ideas on what to actually do for merchandising. So I did what any reasonable person would do these days. I turned to ChatGPT and asked the following question. ChatGPT, give me 10 short motivational quotes for people who produce immersive audio for music and games. ChatGPT did what it was told and gave me 10 taglines. However, they were a little bit too long, so I went back with a follow-up question. Give me 10 more, make them shorter, and focus on immersive and spatial audio production. And this is where it started to get really interesting. You see the results that ChatGPT gave me next to me. They are all pretty good. However, one of them particularly caught my attention, and that is, in immersion, we find presence. And I now have that on my pillow. Well, the art, by the way, was done by a human artist. The reason this is so remarkable is that immersion and presence are two terms that are often used in academic research about virtual environment systems, but very rarely in connection with 3D audio or spatial audio. The terms describe very similar, but nevertheless completely different concepts. In Immersion and Presence, Daniel R. Maestre writes about immersion and presence. Thus, whereas immersion is a technology-related, objective aspect of virtual environments, presence is a psychological, perceptual, and cognitive consequence of immersion. Presence is thought of as the psychological perception of being in or existing in the virtual environment in which one is immersed. So in order to feel presence, you need to be immersed first. You can only find presence through immersion. The tagline that ChatGPT came up with is actually quite ingenious. So ingenious, in fact, that I first thought that it must have found it somewhere and just regurgitated that statement. So I went to Google and started to search. But even after a reasonably thorough search, I couldn't find any source that had actually used that particular tagline. Now, it could be that the search tools that I used simply didn't have access to some of the content that was used in order to train ChatGPT. That is very well possible. But nevertheless, chances are that ChatGPT created the tagline by instinctively understanding the relationship between immersion, presence, and its relevance for spatial audio production. In that sense, ChatGPT showed emergent behavior. It showed what humans would call creativity. By the way, if you're interested in that pillow, which is actually really, really nice, you can find that pillow and a couple of other in Immersion We Find Presence items in the merch store. Link is in the description below. These examples indicate that generative artificial intelligence is not just recreating things that existed before. It is indeed using a creative process in order to create something completely new out of the things that it has seen before, or one could say it is creating original artwork. So this brings us to a final question, and that is, does this mean that generative artificial intelligence is going to overtake all creative jobs soon? And the answer to that question is, I think, what most people, including most creatives, get completely wrong. Yes, artificial intelligence can and will disrupt pretty much all creative industries. So much is certain. However, in a world where everybody has access to artificial intelligence, it will become increasingly important to stand out, to do something different, to be better than artificial intelligence. And for that, we need artists and designers. It is important to point out that this is completely irrespective of how good generative artificial intelligence is going to become. There's always going to be the need to stand out. There's always going to be the need to push beyond what generative artificial intelligence can create. There's always going to be the need for people who are so good that they can outperform generative artificial intelligence. Now, as artificial intelligence continuously evolves, being better will obviously become more and more difficult. However, I strongly believe that my proposition will hold true, at least for the foreseeable future, at least until we have what people call artificial superintelligence, which I don't think is going to happen in my lifetime and probably also not in the lifetime of most of you. I therefore think that we are entering a time where there will be an increased need for people with advanced skills and knowledge in art and design that can push the boundaries of artificial intelligence beyond what artificial intelligence can create on its own. There will be an increased need for people that I would call true artists or true designers, people that actually really have the skills and the knowledge to make that work. At the same time, I strongly believe that the time where you could watch a few YouTube videos in order to gain the production skills necessary to land a couple of low-level production jobs is completely over. That's something where artificial intelligence is just better. However, I firmly believe that the time for people who have a deep conceptual understanding of art and design and who can use that understanding in order to optimize the use of artificial intelligence tool in their creative work had just begun. In my opinion, we are starting to enter the era of the true or truly human artist or designer. But what is your opinion about this subject? Let me know in the comment section. Are you an artist who is scared about artificial intelligence? Are you using these tools in order to elevate your productions to the next level? Let me know. I really would like to hear from you. And with that being said, see you at the next video.